Hey Matt, happy Friday. How are you?
Hey, Shabri. I'm really well, thank you. Thank you for having me. Look forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one that I've been really looking forward to, one that's a topic that's close to my heart and I know very close to your heart as well. So I'm really excited to get stuck in. But before we start, Matt, I'd love for you to be able to give an introduction to who you are, and then an introduction to Uhubs and a little bit about what are the biggest challenges that Uhubs is solving in the market right now.
Yeah, happily. Shabri, I've been, I guess, building businesses of some form for most of my career. I've been in tech for about the last 10 years of that. I spent a brief period in consulting as well. And um, yeah, I guess I'm kind of commonly known as the guy who built or helped build the startup program at one of the big consultancies here in London. And that was kind of like my initial kind of breakthrough project, if you like. Um, and during that period, spent about 4 years working with hundreds of early stage to mid stage founders across Europe who had raised venture funding, were scaling out their businesses, scaling out their teams. And I set up a service that helped connect founders with investors and also help them sell um, B2B. So worked with hundreds of founders and their go-to-market leadership teams, and during that journey, observed that the biggest pain point, the biggest blocker to growth, was commonly how do you scale a predictable and repeatable sales team? And as you know well, it's a very hard thing to do. Lots of challenges in attempting to do so, and I always refer back to sort of Tom Glasson who's obviously led Pavilion here in the UK. He talks about the average tenure of revenue leaders at these fast growth companies, and it seems to get shorter every
Yeah.
time I hear that number. So I currently am building a business to help make a dent in that problem and help leaders build predictable, repeatable, and scalable revenue teams that close more revenue. So we at UHubs we're actually leaning into the data side of the problem. So we're analyzing thousands of data points from the existing tools that salespeople use. And then we're also layering on top psychometric data to, in effect, understand salespeople's strengths and their blind spots. And then, of course, I have to include the buzzword AI. We are building out some AI models now to make predictive recommendations to help leaders understand things like the exact profile of salesperson they should hire next, and how to onboard and train each rep to help them close more deals.
Amazing background, and actually, although I know you, I've never heard of. I didn't know the earlier part of your career, which actually led you to UHub. So that's fascinating, and I can see how UHubs is growing so quickly right now. So you talked a lot about solving a challenge for revenue leaders. So if we dive into this, Matt, when you're talking to revenue leaders right now, what are some of the common themes that you're hearing as they're thinking about the composition and the composition of talent and skills within their teams?
Yeah, so I did a LinkedIn post this morning, funny enough, and I was just reflecting on the train into the office this morning on some really common themes that I'm hearing from CROs, VPs of sales right now. As it's been well documented, the kind of growth at all costs period is over. So we've seen a lot of pullback on investment in headcount. I'm hearing a lot of sort of talk around marketing budgets being cut, slashed, or paused temporarily. So um, the big emphasis for most of the leaders that I'm speaking to on a daily basis is all around efficiency. It's how do I get more out of the team that I've got. I had a conversation with a really experienced CRO this week who's kind of conducting an assessment with us to understand like does he actually have the right people on the bus. I think so much hiring was done in 20 through 2021, early part of 2022, and we're obviously seeing now a correction, particularly in the tech space. Um, for a lot of those hires, perhaps weren't great fit hires for the role or the organizations that brought those people in. So we're seeing a lot of leaders looking to move away from hiring more headcount for growth. They're having to become more creative. They're having to become much more efficient, and they're having to focus on building a team of A players,
Mm,
rather than just adding more and more AEs. Just one other thing I'll add to that, given that the theme is all around efficiency right now. Um, I had a lunch with Sam Jacobs last week in the States, and Sam was sharing that one of the guys that sits on his board is CEO of a publicly listed software company, and he actually put it that every time he hires an AE, that's a cost to his business.
mm,
There's actually a drop off in productivity for a couple of reasons, right? That AE has to be onboarded. It takes away time and resources from the existing team, but also you're taking leads away from a fully ramped seller who's probably closing at 20 to 30%, and you're giving those leads to a seller that's at best probably closing them at 10%. So I think it's a different mindset. There's much more of an emphasis around doing more with less, which I hate that term now. It's been used so much, but it's all about efficiency right now.
I completely agree. I saw your LinkedIn post this morning, and I think common themes there. And what the one that really stuck out to me was, do you have the right people on the bus? And you sort of can't be carrying passengers on right now. So I wanted to tie that back to something you were talking about when you were explaining Uhub. So you talked about the fact that you've got these sort of psychometric data in there as well, and you can tie that to the competencies. Um, what are the key skills that you're seeing that are there today that maybe weren't there 12 months ago? And what kind of trends are you seeing around that?
We recently did a bit of mining on our data, and one thing that really stood out in Q1 of this year is product knowledge as a competency has really risen in terms of our data across our higher performers in our customer base. So it's quite interesting. We had a bit of a debate internally as to why that is, and I think there's perhaps some relevance with the theme of today's conversation. We One of the hypotheses we've got is that I think it's becoming harder to stand out. So another challenge we're hearing a lot of is like top of funnel is becoming much harder. How do you stand out? How do you break through? And what we're seeing actually is that the reps that are true subject matter experts in their domain, that can really educate their audience and their customer base, they're the ones that are consistently managing to hit their number. And so that as a kind of breakthrough competency right now is those who are experts in what they're selling, is are doing better, generally speaking.
That's so fascinating to me, but actually, as I think about it, not surprising, because I know, when I used to work with revenue teams, it was actually, we don't want to be bombarding our prospect with product knowledge and feature function, right? We actually want to be focusing on the sales skills about how do you control the conversation, how do you add value, how do you, sell with empathy, all those kind of different things. But I think this ties in with the conversation I had with Rory Sadler last week, who's doing an amazing job at Trumpet, which is all about being the guide. And I think right now, he was saying buyers are inundated with information. You can go to G2, you can go to people's websites, but a lot of people have never really worked with a guide in that way. So, what do you think sellers need to do to actually now, like as you say, become that subject matter expert?
So much of what I'm hearing from the market at the moment, and also what we're seeing in our data, comes back to um, the word that our good friend James Ski loves, which is confidence. He's going to love me for plugging that, by the way.
Yeah.
Um, and this is interesting, right? Because when you think about things like product knowledge, well, actually, what does a really deep understanding of your product and the value proposition help you to do? Well, it helps you be really confident on calls
Yeah.
because you truly understand the value that you can deliver. And then if you're running, effective discovery, and you're really identifying deep pain and you're implicating that pain, you know as a seller that you're confident that your solution can solve that pain. So I think confidence is a really big part, and obviously it's a difficult thing to pinpoint, I guess. Where does confidence come from? I
Yeah.
put my personal experience is confidence can be lost really quickly, particularly amongst salespeople. You have a couple of bad months, you have a bad quarter, and very quickly you suddenly your confidence is knocked. And I've had it in reps in my team, I've had it in my own sales career. So I think focusing on these foundational competency areas like product and industry knowledge, making sure that you're doing the basics well, um, and just making sure that we're removing any distractions or interference with our sales reps, so that they can confidently execute on sales calls with customers. I think is a really big part of it. Um, so yeah, I think confidence is a massive thing. And to your point around being that guide, it's pretty hard to be a guide to someone if you're not confident
Yeah.
in where you're taking them.
How do you measure confidence out of interest? Because it's one of those sort of more subjective things. If you're looking at it on a scorecard or a competency framework, how would you advise? I guess two questions. How would you advise leaders to measure the confidence of the reps in their team? And how would you advise reps to be self aware or measure their own levels of confidence at any given time?
It's a great question, and I wish there was a simple answer, but there isn't. So I'll try my best to break it down in a couple of ways. I think that just the first thing to mention is there are other adjacent areas that you can look at, which are likely to be leading indicators of a confident rep. So one of the things we look at a lot is something called growth mindset.
Yeah.
So we have built into our product a growth mindset score, and we actually have started to quantify levels of growth mindset across reps and teams. And tracking this over time is really fascinating because you can almost correlate them perfectly with if a rep has a bad month or a bad quarter. Quite often their growth mindset score drops off in the subsequent month. So there's kind of like an after effect of shit. I've had a bad one. How do I bounce back from this now? And growth mindset tends to drop off. So I think looking at factors like growth mindset and thinking about whether those are trending up, whether they're trending down, can be quite good leading indicators for confidence. I think obviously the second thing I'd add there as well is thinking about things like activity.
Yeah.
Um, so I always like the analogy that Tom Carsley uses, which is sales performance really comes down to um, activity or inputs
Hmm.
times by competencies. So it's like, can you do enough of the input, and can you do it well enough to be effective?
Yeah.
So by looking at activity and looking at metrics as well, that's another kind of good leading indicator. If you've got sellers in your team that have really big drop offs in activity, there's probably a really good coaching opportunity there to lean into that data and say, hey, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Um, so those are just a couple of kind of leading adjacent indicators that I think are helpful when we think about confidence in reps. Just a final point I'd add as well is like a qualitative piece as a leader. Um, I used to play a high level of golf, so I played professional golf at one point, and my golf coach used to drill into me this concept of quiet confidence,
Mm.
which has always stuck with me. And the key behind quiet confidence is that basically confidence actually comes from within. It's an intrinsic thing. It's quite often when you hear people, kind of the loudest person in the room, the loudest voice, they can quite often be the least confident.
Yeah.
So we used to talk a lot in the kind of national golf team around who's quietly confident and who's actually like running their mouth the morning of a tournament. They're actually probably not that confident about their game. So
Yeah.
I think as a leader, I think that's just an interesting insight for sales leaders to think about, because quite often, the loudest, most extroverted reps on your team, they might actually be going through a bit of a rough patch confidence wise. And it's kind of seeing through that and recognizing who are the quietly confident reps on your team that are going to deliver and execute really well.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's that whole salespeople don't need to be extroverts type thing either, right? You can have some really, high performing individuals in your team who might be introverted, but they bring a whole different range of skill sets. So I scribbled down lots of notes there. That was super interesting. I want to shift back a little bit to the conversation we were talking about being a guide. So as you look at Uhubs as your platform, um, apart from product knowledge, what are the kind of other skills and competencies and training do you think need to be done to get reps up to that guide and being a guide effectively?
So I think that there's a few things, and obviously this varies a lot, right? I just kind of um, counter this point with by saying that every organization we're working with right now has unique or nuances to the challenges they're facing. Depends on who you're selling to, the deal size, your go-to-market strategy. There's lots of factors in play. So it is, when I'm sharing insights like this, I am, really generalizing. Um, but there's a few things that we're seeing work really well, and with the customers that we're working with who are bucking the trend, so to speak, and continuing to grow well. And a big part of this may be down to the fact that their sales reps are able to guide and navigate customers. I think one thing is content. So we're seeing a lot of customers that are growing really effectively right now. They're really doubling down on content. And what do I mean by that? I mean, publicly facing content, generated by like a central marketing or growth team. But we're also seeing top reps really double down on their own personal content strategy. Um, I read, it's a report from about 10 or 15 years ago now, but during the previous downturn, there was a lot of data that suggested the challenger sale was a really effective way of selling through a downturn.
Yeah,
And one of the reasons I remember reading in that research was that when there's a downturn, people are much more driven by fear. So buyers become much more nervous about making decisions because, well, their jobs could be on the line if the purchase decision goes wrong. So the stakes are higher for buyers. And I think what Challenger as a methodology does for salespeople is it helps us transfer confidence, going back to that confidence word, from the rep to the buyer, and it does that through education.
yeah,
So we're seeing a lot of the top performing reps now really ramp up their content, um, carving that kind of niche out for themselves as a trusted expert in their space.
yeah,
So when it comes around to engaging in a deal with a prospect, that prospect has probably been following that individual rep's content on LinkedIn for a
mm,
period of weeks or months. There's already some pre-established trust there, and I think that really helps the process of guiding a prospect through a journey because there's that status and credibility and trust already established.
yeah. 100%. I'm a big fan of the Challenger methodology. I remember I was working with a sales team last year, and they sell a mental health platform, and I asked them to come up with a teaching point, which is you'll be aware is one of the three pillars of the challenger sale. And it was the first time that they'd ever thought about it like that. And I said, you've got a really strong value proposition. How do you turn this into a teaching point? And I said, look, imagine you're talking to someone who use regular light bulbs today. How would you educate them to use energy efficient light bulbs? What would you say? And I think the penny dropped there, and they realized they weren't actually educating the buyer. They were sort of pitching at the buyer, so to say. So, how would you sort of encourage people to start a personal content strategy though? Because it's quite a difficult thing to really do.
It is, and I think the other thing I'd say on top of that is it's quite a difficult thing to encourage your team
Mm,
to do.
yeah,
Again, like not that many, particularly more junior salespeople, are perhaps confident enough to go out and create their own organic content. Um, I guess just a couple of things that I found to work pretty well, particularly as a guy who has for the last 4 or 5 years deleted all social media. with the exception of LinkedIn. So when it came to, content and posting and self promotion, that was like my least favorite thing in the world. But I've been pushed and encouraged by some good people around me to do it. And I've been posting pretty consistently for the last 12, 18 months on LinkedIn. So as someone who's really bad at it, some things that have worked for me personally have just been routine. So I think it's like, James Clear, Atomic Habits. It's got
Mm,
to become ingrained into your daily process and routine. What works for me is that I actually block an hour out on a Sunday afternoon, usually when I'm watching football on the on TV and sitting on the couch. And what I'll do is I'll actually throughout the week I've just got a folder, a notes folder on my phone called content ideas. And whenever I'm having an interesting conversation like the one we're having now, I'll come off the call, I'll jot down something really quickly that's just sparked a little idea for a little insight. And then on Sunday, I'll pick up those bullet points. And maybe, by the time you get to Friday, you think of, I don't know about you, but, I'll have anywhere between like 5 to 10 customer conversations a day. I'm getting to the end of Friday, that there's easily 15 to 20 bullet points in that folder. And then I just build each bullet point out into like a little post, whatever that post kind of is. And I find Sundays like a good time for me to do that personally.
yeah.
And obviously everything, it kind of compounds, right? I think this is the big thing we found with content is as you start as you start making a proactive effort to generate more content, you're having more conversations with more relevant people in your ICP who are then giving you more relevant insights that then attracts more people within that ICP. So there's a compounding effect to it. But just creating yourself a routine, and being strict about how you do it, and then just being consistent and making sure you're trying to post consistently and you're engaging with other people's content as well. Small things which I'm sure many of the listeners will have heard before, but seem to have worked well for me.
I love that. It's really tangible advice there. I remember someone once said to me, after your sales calls, they were a salesperson, they said, after your sales calls, make a note of all the questions that your prospect has asked you. And then you'll start to see trends in those maybe frequently asked questions.
I love that.
Start posting that, because that's what people in your network and the ICP that you're selling to are obviously asking, and it's top of mind for them. So some really tangible stuff there. I think that's excellent. So you talked a little bit about in Q1, product knowledge was one of the top things that you were seeing. Within the profiling that you do, are there any other insights that have massively changed in the way that product knowledge has changed that you can share?
We've seen um, we've seen a big change across the board just in terms of the so the way that we look at things is we look at what we call above target performance. So we look at your A players in your existing team, and then we also profile your below target performers, and then we compare and contrast. We look at the differences, we look for commonalities, and what we really are trying to do is we're trying to understand what does that ideal DNA of a high consistent high performer look like within your team. What we're not doing is we're not saying that you have to hire salespeople that look exactly like each other. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to look for the common characteristics that can at least de-risk the process for leaders, right? Because it's a risky business building salespeople. It's expensive. Um, I think 380K is the average cost of an unsuccessful sales hire, right?
Oh,
So in looking at the analysis between above target and below target, I think just a couple of generic insights to share is that the profiles have changed.
yeah.
So we've seen that the high performers have been able to adapt and they've been able to shift um, their ability to develop new skills as well. Growth mindset is always a really important one, which I mentioned earlier, and I think the importance of growth mindset is that it helps A players continuously develop new skills. Like the job is never done. I met a high performing AE at a really well known software business last week in the States who's got almost 20 years of sales experience, has chosen to continue as an IC, and just absolutely loves the game, like just loves the sales game, has just so much passion for the profession, and is just constantly constantly learning new things and constantly trying to add to the skill set. And I think that's like a great example. I think about some of the great, going back to football, I think about some of the great Premier League footballers, people like Scholes, Giggs, they, even at like kind of 38, 39, at the tail end of their career, there's stories from Sir Alex Ferguson and Rio Ferdinand, and so talking about how like those guys were the hardest workers.
Yeah.
Like they were so diligent in terms of their processes and their improvement and their recovery. And I think there's a lot that salespeople can learn from sports people like that. I mean, obviously you got examples in tennis as well, right? The way that Nadal and Federer and these guys have just gone on and on and on, but they work harder. They work harder than the other guys. They're meticulous about the preparation.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it's no different for salespeople. And we really are seeing A players have the ability to and the mindset to continuously do that, whereas perhaps B and C players are less willing.
I love both the Manchester United analogies and the tennis analogies, both two things that are close to my heart. So I think you're all right. I think it's not just about. I think before I've worked with sales reps who would do 120% of quota, but terrible on process, terrible at sort of engaging in team meetings. That kind of lone wolf. If we think back to the challenger, that kind of lone wolf profile, I don't think that carries you anymore. And so I think, as you talk about this kind of all-rounded approach, about, the planning, the mindset, the confidence, the attitude, it's all about your work ethic. And I think it's so much more now. And then on the flip side, the people that are kind of below target, what are some of the attributes and traits you're seeing there?
Well, definitely lower scores in a lot of these key areas, right? Um, we've seen, for instance, one simple thing, but particularly for junior salespeople and outbound sellers, SDRs, like time management and planning. So zooming in on their ability to complete tasks in the time frame that they set themselves, the ability to be accountable to getting something done when they said they're going to do it, is definitely, comes out lower. And these are, I think it's not rocket science what we're talking about, right? A lot of this is just like the basics of sales, but in our experience, the above target profile, the A player profile, they do the basics exceptionally well, generally speaking. So we see lower scores across the board in core competencies, time management and planning, client communication, responsiveness. And these are the things that really matter right now. Going back to the point around being a guide for your customer. Well, your prospects can get lost pretty quickly if you don't follow up with them for more than 48, 72 hours. Prospects really think, well, this isn't a trusted guide. They don't really care about me. They've kind of left me on this journey. Um, so being really responsive, doing the basics and the fundamentals well. It's what we're seeing in the data. I don't think it's rocket science or anything new, but I just think that we've come out of a really inflated market where we could get away with a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
We can't get away with it anymore.
100%. I think loyalty and trust are probably becoming harder to gain. So what we did a year ago, 2 years ago, isn't going to fly now. So that's super insightful. Thank you so much. I've scribbled down loads of notes. I guess final question is, what is an example of a rep or company who you think are really nailing this approach that we've talked about and that you have experienced, and what made it so special, that stood out to you as a buyer?
It's a great question. So with my buyer's hat on, as in someone that I've bought from
Yeah,
recently.
yeah. Or maybe not even bought from, but you went through that buying process, and at least their approach really stood out to you, and they were that sort of guide and above target seller, and they displayed those competencies.
Yeah, so look, I'm going to I won't name any names, but we Q4 last year we became a Sales Loft customer. So I went through a buying buying journey with them. That was obviously like peak uncertain times.
Yeah.
um, and like wouldn't advise trying to close a funding round during that time. Jesus. But but that was a solution that my team had. Yeah, I think the sales loft reps, and there was more than one of them, so that was another thing that's interesting. I think working as a team on a deal is something else we're seeing quite a lot of. They had done a really good job of kind of creating a panel of advocates within my team, so that the deal was almost was basically a contract stage before I even got
Oh,
pulled
wow.
in.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so they did a really good job of pulling together advocates within the organization. I mean, even small things like I'm in the office today and it's just me, and I'm looking around and like everyone's got these sales loft phone chargers on their desks. So it's I know it's a small thing, but it's like they'd done that months in advance. The stash, front of mind, they built really good buy-in and a kind of committee. Um, and then really I came in right at the end just to negotiate deal terms. So I think that was a really great example of how they were actually the guide to the champions or
Yeah.
within my team, and did such a good job of it that you know that they actually didn't need economic buyer involvement until the final step.
Amazing. Like some really good stuff there. I love the idea of like working as a team and building that panel of advocacy. And you're not the first person who has given SalesLoft as an example for that final question. So we're looking forward to having someone from SalesLoft on here soon, sharing all their secrets too. But for now, thank you so much, Matt. Incredibly insightful. I really enjoyed the conversation, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Shabri. Biggest takeaway for me is that you're a fellow Manchester United fan. So
After last night, potentially considering a change.